Okay. Thank you, everybody, for being here. With that, we'll go to the approval of the April 14th meeting. Did that come through, Bethany?
Yep, absolutely. In order to approve, somebody is just going to need to type in that they make a motion. So like, for instance, Becky Tuttle, she was the last one who typed in. If she wants to make a motion, she just put Becky Tuttle motion.
Anybody? Okay. Troy made a motion. Do I have a second? And a second by Brent Clark. All those in favor say aye.
Aye. Pete says aye.
Okay. All right, we're going to go forward with the approval of the minutes of March 10th. A motion and a second again, please. Motion by Brent Clark. Don't be bashful. Okay, we got a couple of Jim. Seconded it. All those in favor say aye. Okay, moving on to director's report. Chad, the MTP update.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair and board members. This is to report to you the progress on MTP and TIP. WAMPO and KDOT had increasing cooperation in making the projects listed in our MTP document. So that's the progress today we'll be reporting to you. And this is also the regional transportation projects were also coordinated between Chamber and REAP and KDOT. So that also is a great example of cooperation among various agencies. That's the main item today. Plus, we also have the TIP update where the funding of the WAMPO federal funding projects were occurred by project selection committee. So that would be reported today. These two were the main items. We have consent agenda as well. And in your packets on page 9, there is COVID-19 impacts that staff put together for your benefit. For the most part, with few minor impacts, most of the pre-construction activities are continued on schedule. So that's, and then in your packets on page 10, there is information on the upcoming webinar series as usual. That's all the today's agenda is, MTP as well as TIP, which is due in our June 2020. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Good. Are there any questions? If not, the TIP TIP update.
TIP update, we have WAMPO funding projects list that was considered by the project selection committee and determined and recommended list. So that would be presented by Chris and Kristen in our action items. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Questions? All right. Web planning.
That's in your informational packet.
Okay. All right. Anything else to add, Chad?
No,
Okay, consent agenda, the TIP amendment 5.5. Do I have a motion? By David Dennis. Second by Cindy. Click on them. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Alrighty. Thank you. Let's see, public comment. I believe Jane, you would like to speak.
And because I don't have a chat function that I can find, I'm just talking. Is
Yeah.
that good, Dan?
That'd be fine.
Okay, thank you. So I'm here as I have been before, with the start of Build It and They Will Come. That was true of a baseball field in a movie some years ago. However, in Wichita, the reverse is happening for the $750 million baseball stadium that we now have. Maybe 6 to 8 weeks ago, one of our good Wichita City Council people asked in one of his cute surveys how, that he does every time he puts out an e-letter, how many baseball games in the new stadium are his constituents expecting to attend. 41% said none, and now it's closed, so 100% of people are not coming. Build it and they will come? No, that baseball stadium is empty and nobody knows when it'll be safe for anyone. $750 million. Today, I'm wondering something similar about new highways. We in Kansas already are overbuilt with highways, the fourth largest network of roads after California, Illinois, and Texas, even though Kansas is the 13th largest in size and the 36th largest in population. We have plenty of highways. Our population is predicted to grow very, very slowly, and we know that our revenues are going down. We actually knew that before the pandemic, and we sure know it now, that tax money will shrink. However, we do have some transportation that's actually happy right now. We're light on that infrastructure that residents, actual people, are using right now during this coronavirus period. Socially distant, but happy, healthy, eager, active folks with dogs and kids and family breathing in fresh spring air, being neighborly, friendly, active, and safe from the much lighter traffic on our streets due to those folks who are working at home, staying at home, or who could no longer afford to put gas in their cars. This slowdown in vehicles is producing much cleaner air here and around the world. Build it and they will come? I don't know. My relatives and shopping in far southeast Wichita were inconvenient for 6 years because of the cumbersome detours and delay of tedious, lavish, and massively expensive East Kellogg construction. Do we know the lost sales revenues due to East Kellogg construction? To me, it looks like we've all paid big taxpayer bucks plus years of inconvenience to hustle folks and freight away outside of our town. In vivid contrast, we don't have enough transportation basics for the other 1/3 or more WAMPO residents who do not drive. We have precious little safety for the 8-year-olds, the 80-year-olds, the wheelchair bound, the low vision, the low income, the folks who want to be healthy, the folks who are staying at home and working at home. Where should we be putting our taxpayer dollars? I hope somebody's doing research on this phenomenon. how safe streets promotes health, enables less depression, definitely more quality of life. Was Build It and They Will Come true in that movie? Is it true with our $750 million baseball stadium? Is it true with new highways? We do know that it's true with walkers and bicyclists on streets, paths, and sidewalks now, that if they have it and it is safe, they will come. So I'm going to beg and plead, as I have to my own great embarrassment again and again, to ask for crumbs of those billions that are now going for new highways to enable local, people-focused health and safety.
Dan, I believe Cindy Claycomb and Mike Moriarty want to say something.
Yes, this is Cindy Claycomb. Jane, I just want to say thank you for your comments today. And, you know, I support bike and ped projects. I just wanted to clarify just a couple of things for everybody that's on the call today. The baseball stadium project is a $75 million project, not $750 million. So just to be clear on that, and that it is a multi-sport stadium. So while people won't necessarily come for baseball, they may come for some of those other 200 events a year. So just to clarify, in case someone didn't understand those things. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jane. We appreciate it. Any other comments from the public? If not, moving on to new business. Chris Upchurch, MTP project list.
Thank you. Let's see. Bethany, can you give me presentation control? Oh,
I think you just
hang on, not that. Yeah, you still need to be the presenter, but I need to get the keyboard and mouse control.
Yeah. You got it now?
Yes. All right. Technical issues ironed out there. So if you can remember back a month ago, I know a lot of stuff has happened in the past month. This body approved the project list for the MTP. But when we did that, there was a pretty big hole in the middle of that project list. The list that you approved did not include any of the biggest KDOT capital projects for our region, things like the North Junction or the Northwest Bypass. Since then, KDOT has provided us a list of those big capital projects that they want to include in the MTP, and that's what we're going to talk about today. However, I have to bury the lead a little bit here. Before I talk about those nice big projects, I have to start out by talking about fiscal constraint. Let's see, there we go. And I know fiscal constraint is going to be a fascinating subject for all of you. So this is a federal requirement for us. Federal rules require it. And basically it says that spending cannot exceed available funding. We can't spend more than we think we're going to have. This is what keeps our project list from being a pie in the sky list of every possible thing we might want. We have to keep it somewhat grounded in reality. Now, in order to do this, we have to make some assumptions about how much revenue is coming in. Whoa. Just busted through a bunch of slides there. So, well, slides aren't quite caught up, but in order to do this, we have to make some assumptions about how much money is going to be coming in. And we did that. Kristen Zimmerman's put a lot of effort in last spring in order to talk with various member jurisdictions, to talk with some experts, and come up with a total for how much revenue we thought the region would be bringing in. One of the assumptions we made then was that the KDOT cap spending in our region was essentially going to remain flat. It wasn't going to grow or decline at all over the next 20 years. As part of the development of this list of major regional KDOT projects, they have asked us to change that assumption. So they've asked us to assume that KDOT spending in our region is going to grow at 1.5% per year rather than remaining flat. This is the assumption that KDOT uses internally, is my understanding, and you also see several other MPOs in Kansas using this 1.5% per year assumption. So based on that assumption, KDOT has provided us a list of the largest capital projects that they want to do in our region. Here now I seem to have slide control back. And here's the list. The first few projects on this list should probably be familiar to most of you. The remaining phases of the North Junction, East Kellogg, West Kellogg, and the remaining phases of the I-235 and Kellogg project. The next project on there, I-235 from Kellogg to Zoo, is a fairly new one. This would involve expanding the I-235 freeway between Kellogg and Zoo from 2 lanes to 3 in each direction. Next project on there, I-135 in Kellogg, is also new. This is not the big reconstruction of the whole interchange that has been talked about a little bit. This is basically doing some more preservation type work on some of the bridges on I-135 there. US 54 in Washington would be rebuilding that interchange. And finally, the last project is buying right-of-way for the Northwest Bypass. So not any of the other pre-construction phases or construction, but just buying right-of-way. So that's the list of projects that KDOT has asked to be included on our main MTP project list. However, they do have some additional projects that they would like to include. However, we have that pesky fiscal constraint requirement, and even with the changed revenue assumption, we can't include everything that KDOT has asked to put on here and still meet our fiscal constraint requirement. So the solution to this is there is an option that the federal government gives us called an illustrative list. See if I can get the slides to advance here. So in addition to the fiscally constrained project list, we can have this illustrative project list. It's not subject to the fiscal constraint requirement. There's no limit on the cost of projects we can put in there. This can be the pie in the sky, totally untethered to reality list of things we'd like in our region. The catch is that if we actually want to move forward with any project on the illustrative list, first we have to amend it into the main fiscally constrained list where it would be subject to that fiscal constraint requirement. So projects on the illustrative list are sort of one step away from being in the plan. Now, KDOT has given us a couple of projects that they'd like to include on the illustrative list. First up is all of the remaining phases of the Northwest Bypass project. So that would include utility work, preliminary engineering through the final design, and actual construction of the bypass. The other project is I-235 from Zoo to Seneca, which would basically be a continuation of that I-235 project I mentioned earlier, adding an additional lane, bringing it from 2 lanes in each direction up to 3. So those would be the illustrative list, and sort of one step away from being on the main MTP list. So, any questions?
Apparently none. Go ahead.
All right. Well, if there aren't any questions, oh,
I did submit a question.
Jim's question.
Okay.
Yes. Why is there nothing on K254? I thought that was one of our top priorities that we talked about.
It is one of the projects that was identified as a major regional priority in the WAMPO region. KDOT did not give it to us as one of the projects that they wanted as one of their projects on the project list. And perhaps Mike could speak to that if we've got his audio sorted out.
We're still working on that with Mike.
All right.
Chris, John had a question too.
Okay. Jack, do you just want me to read that, or do you want to unmute and ask it?
Oh, okay. Well, it just sounds to me like all of a sudden we're being told what projects we're going to do or what they want us to say, and so we have no say-so.
So at least WAMPO's past practice has been for stuff that is not WAMPO funded. So we've got the stuff that's getting WAMPO money that is already locked in that you guys decided on last month. For stuff that's not WAMPO funded, we have generally let the project sponsor decide what's going to be listed in the MTP and have been willing to list anything that they want, subject to our fiscal constraint requirement. So when it comes to the KDOT projects, we've pretty much listed whatever KDOT has asked us to put in there. That practice is why we developed the major regional priorities that we've been talking about in previous months, to have some place in the plan where WAMPO can say what our priorities are versus what KDOT says that they would like included. But in terms of the project list itself and the illustrative list in this case, we have generally left it to the project sponsors to decide what they want listed in there under their names.
Okay, it just doesn't sound right to me. I mean, all of a sudden we're getting this action list, so to speak, and here it is, folks, like it or not. I don't know. It just doesn't sound right to me.
Yeah, well, and it is ultimately up to this board to decide whether or not you want to include any or all of these projects on the list. You guys have the final decision on that. I'm just sort of here to relay the list that KDOT has given us that they've asked us to include.
Okay, thank you, Chris.
We could revise the list and have it included, 254 included in the illustrative list as well. We can do that.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'd have to look up how much money we've got left and how much we have left under our fiscal constraint requirement. I'm not sure we have enough money to put 254 in on the fiscally constrained list without taking something else out.
Chris, I believe
to check on that.
this would go under the illustrative list, not the constrained list.
Yes. Yes, Troy, you're right. So the constraint list is the based on projected funding, and illustrated list would still be the list of projects that is outside the funding projection. So we could include in the illustrative list the 254 project.
Any other comments toward adding the 254 project to the second list? Well, I'm going to assume that we probably would go ahead and put it in there if we can. Okay. Chris, would you want a motion to add that to the list?
Yeah, so I think that would be the sort of second option listed under the bullet points here. And I'm sorry, we're using an older version of the presentation that uses the slides from the TAC, so you can sort of ignore the recommended bit on there. It would be a motion to add the KDOT capital projects to the fiscally constrained project list and adopt the illustrative list with the addition of 254 and modify the KDOT revenue assumptions.
Okay. Could I get
I saw a question from Cindy in the chat box.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I want to follow up on John's comment, and I guess my question is, so how does this tie us down? You know, or does it tie us down? Maybe is my question, because as John's saying, I know it's our list, but now we're being given the list saying here's what it is. So, could you explain that just a little bit more?
Sure. So this would be you know, in order to have something built in our region, it has to be included on the project list in the MTP. That's a requirement to build anything that's regionally significant or has federal funding associated with it. So this is a fairly significant decision in terms of the development of the MTP as these things go. In terms of being tied down, this can obviously be amended in the future, subject to the fiscal constraint requirement. We've amended Move 2040 several times to add or modify projects. But it is a kind of a restriction. Nothing can go into the TIP or get built unless it is on this list.
Any other comments? Okay,
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, good. I'm in. It's Mike Moriarty from KDOT. I was having a technical glitch that was most certainly on my end, so I certainly apologize for that. I did want to comment briefly on the project list as being presented. So that list is basically items that were not completed, KDOT projects in the current MTP, and they were also projects that were prioritized coming out of our rounds of local consult back in 2019.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
And this is Brent Turstrup. I'd like to make one more comment on that also. 254 is a priority. I'd hate for people to leave this meeting thinking 254 is not a priority. We did begin doing a study out there to decide what the proper actions are on 254. It is a priority to KDOT.
Good. Thank you, Brent. Okay, Chris, I believe I had a motion and a second. You want to remind me who they were? I know you kind of went by fast on mine. So.
I believe Jim did the motion and Troy seconded.
Okay. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Okay. Motion looks like it carries. All right. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Yeah. You have anything else to add, sir? No. Okay. We'll move on to 2020 WAMPO funding cycle. Kristen?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Let's see, Bethany, I am going to share my screen.
Okay, I can do that. There you go.
Thanks. Okay, great. Thank you. Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm pleased to be here today to present the recommendation for the 2020 WAMPO Funding Cycle Awards. This is something we've been working on for the last several months, and the day is finally here to bring it to you for your consideration. If you haven't yet had a chance to review the recommendation, it's shown here on the screen and is also an attachment in your packet. WAMPO does carry out a funding cycle every 2 years in parallel with the update to our Transportation Improvement Program. We started this every 2-year cycle back in 2014 and have carried it out since then in 2016, 2018, and now in 2020. The next one, of course, will be 2 years from now in 2022. During each one of these cycles, $25 to $30 million is awarded through a competitive process with the purpose of implementing the MTP. Funding is made available to current WAMPO-funded projects that are requesting additional funding, and it's also made available to projects on the WAMPO funding menu in the MTP. So during today's presentation, we will review the process used to develop this recommendation and also compare how this recommendation lines up with previous awards. Okay, as you can see here, the WAMPO funding commitments are just one of several paths for the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, or the MTP, to be implemented. The funding commitments that are made during each funding cycle are part of a 2-step process to implement projects in the MTP with WAMPO funding. This 2-step process really defines WAMPO's near-term investment priorities. So the first step in this 2-step process is the WAMPO funding menu in the MTP. Like Chris mentioned in his earlier presentation, this was just approved by the board at your meeting last month after several months of development. This menu includes projects and programs that are planned for and eligible for WAMPO funding in the future, and it's intended to represent the projects that are best able to carry out the vision and goals that were set for the MTP. The second step in this 2-step process is the WAMPO funding commitments that are made during each funding cycle. These commitments actually award and commit funding to specific projects. The 2020 WAMPO funding cycle represents the first of 2 opportunities for projects on the MTP funding menu to be implemented with WAMPO funding. The next opportunity will be our funding cycle 2 years from now. So then, now that we've reviewed some of the background, let's jump into the specifics for this funding cycle. So out of the 47 projects that were on the funding menu in the MTP, applicants requested that 36 of them be included for consideration during this funding cycle. 3 of those applications were requests for additional funding, and the other 33 were new funding requests. So in total, these 36 applications equaled $90 million in requested WAMPO funding. Application summaries are attached in your packet if you'd like to review them. They ran the gamut from intersection improvements to replacement of paratransit vehicles to rails to trails bicycle and pedestrian projects to bridge replacements. It was a very diverse set of projects. And it was a quite competitive process. As you can see here at the bottom, we only had 32 approximately $32 million to award and $90 million in requests. The committee that was charged with developing the recommendation for your consideration today is shown here. This group was appointed back in June. They met several times over the fall and the spring. They heard presentations from all of the applicants and really had their work cut out for them as they developed the recommendation for both the funding menu that was in the MTP and also the recommendation for the funding commitments that you're considering today. You might be asking yourself, well, what process did this group use to develop this funding recommendation? Well, they reviewed 3 screening criteria for each candidate project. It was MTP alignment, project readiness, and project urgency. The thinking here is that we wanted to award funding to implement the best projects from the MTP funding menu. And we also needed to take into account a couple of practical factors, readiness and urgency. So the committee looked at things like how likely will a candidate project be complete with its pre-construction activities for when WAMPO construction funding is available. They looked at whether or not there would be hurdles in project development process. And then finally looked at how urgent the project was to the sponsoring jurisdiction, to the public, and also to the overall land development in our region. So in addition to these 3 criteria, the committee also took into account other considerations, including geographic equity, the impact on the region, and the need for balance. So after they completed this screening process, they ended up recommending a total of 17 projects and awarding the full $32.2 million. This will result in a total investment of $61.5 million into the region's transportation system after we take into account the WAMPO funding and the match that will be provided by the sponsors. Here is a list of the projects that are on the funding cycle recommendation. This list is also in your packet as an attachment. Again, this process was quite competitive. Each applicant ended up with about a 1/3 chance of being awarded funding. And we know there's a lot of disappointed applicants out there. That said, we do want to say that any project that was on the WAMPO funding menu that didn't get selected or recommended for funding this time around is eligible to apply again in 2022. Let's spend a little time looking through just a few of the highlights from this process. The first highlight I wanted to draw your attention to was the transformative nature of many of these projects. Many of them have aspects that will be quite transformative to the communities they serve. Here on the screen are a few examples of these transformative projects. And I wanted to take just a little bit of a closer look at the Nelson Drive realignment project as an example. So this is a project in Derby, and it will realign the frontage road on the eastern side of K15, just south of 63rd Street South, or Patriot Drive through Derby. This project is part of the implementation of Derby's K15 area plan. This plan defines a redevelopment framework for an older commercial area, and it will eventually serve as a gateway to the community of Derby, improve traffic flow, aesthetics, and provide some flex space for a commercial business park. It's really going to change the look and feel of that area. The second highlight I wanted to draw your attention to was about additional funding requests. So all 3 of the projects that requested additional funding are included in this recommendation. In general, WAMPO does tend to have a history of taking care of existing projects when additional needs are demonstrated. And the last highlight I wanted to draw your attention to has to do with planning. Almost all of the planning initiatives that were applied for are on this recommendation. Here's a list of them on your screen. The committee seemed to realize the importance of planning initiatives to guide future investments, and they also realized planning initiatives are a relatively inexpensive way to get movement on a project idea. So let's shift gears here and compare this recommendation with previous award trends. So the pie chart on the left is a project breakout of the types of projects that were awarded during the last 3 funding cycles in 2014, 2016, and 2018. And the pie chart on your right is the project breakout for this funding cycle. And as you can see, the distribution among the project types is very similar to previous trends. And before we move on, we did want to highlight the fact that all of the road modernization and rehabilitation projects do have bicycle and pedestrian components as a part of their projects. And after we account for those components, the total bike ped share is closer to 25% rather than the 5% associated with the dedicated bike ped projects. Next, we wanted to take a look at the trends related to the geographic breakout. You can see that this year's proposal is in line with previous year's awards. Suburban communities do receive the largest share of funding, followed by the city of Wichita at between 30 to 40%, and followed up by the counties, Wichita Transit, KDOT, and WAMPO receiving the balance. And lastly, here's a graph of the award frequency by jurisdiction. So the 2014 awards are shown in light blue, the 2016 awards in dark blue, the 2018 awards in light green, and the 2020 awards in dark green. We included this so you can see how often each jurisdiction has received an award and how many projects were awarded per jurisdiction per cycle. Aside from Wichita, you'll see that no community has been awarded projects during all 4 of the previous cycles. Okay, this is an action item. Your Transportation Advisory Committee has reviewed this recommendation and is recommending that this board approve it as proposed. So with that, I'd be glad to take any questions you might have on this.
Questions? If not, I'd entertain the motion to approve. Okay, I got Troy and Jim to Troy to make the motion and Jim to second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. All right, thank you, Kristen. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Appreciate the work the committee did on that. Moving on, Executive Committee, we did not meet this last month, so we have nothing to report. Troy, do you have anything?
Hi, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep.
All right. Well, we did have our TAC meeting on the 23rd of March. It went very well. Can't stress enough how intelligent and how much background everyone that's in that committee, except for me perhaps, has with what they're doing. It was very good. It was really interesting to listen to Chris talk about a reimagining of the Move 24 or 2040 packet and what it will look like. Right now, the Move 2040 is a rather lengthy document. They've been really working on modifying that. And I think that everyone will be very excited when they see it and how easy it is to understand. Outside of that, one of the items that was brought up was perhaps a method of onboarding new members to WAMPO in a way that they understand. For new people, they would understand everything and how the processes work and why they work the way they work, and maybe even a history. So I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of an onboarding type process we can create for everyone. And then, of course, if anybody else that's been there for a while would want to also be refamiliarized or familiarized with things they don't quite understand, I think that would be a smart thing to have as well. That's all I got.
Okay, thank you, Troy. Tom with KDOT, are you here? Okay, Mike.
I am here. Mr. Chair, I wanted to briefly add another comment to our discussion about the MTP project list. You know, at this time, we're rolling out the new statewide transportation program. We're going through a project selection and prioritization process statewide. So we really haven't selected any new projects. So our thought process with this MTP cycle was to basically, for the KDOT list, to bring forward our projects from the previous MTP. And then once we go through our selection process this summer, we would amend our projects in the MTP, as well as our revenue assumptions on top of that. So I just want to make sure that that folks understand kind of what our process is. I wasn't able to articulate that earlier given my my audio problems.
Okay. Thank you.
But on top of that, I did want to cover a couple of items quickly under my briefing. I just mentioned the Eisenhower Transportation Program. I think by now most of us are aware the legislature passed the Eisenhower Legacy Transportation Program. Governor Kelly did sign that into law. Obviously, we're happy to have a new 10-year program. You know, this is the 4th consecutive 10-year transportation program here in Kansas. And nationally, that is very unique. It's actually unheard of. Most states just don't support transportation like Kansas does, and we're very thankful for that. I do want to thank everyone on this call. I know many of you were instrumental in making this program happen, and I do want to thank you all for your efforts. And I do plan to give an update on the Eisenhower program next month at TPB, and Chad, I'll be talking to you about that. Another item I wanted to cover has to do with the CARES Act. On Friday, March 27th, President Trump did sign the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act into law, also known as the CARES Act. The CARES Act does provide emergency assistance for individuals, families, businesses, anyone that's been affected from the COVID-19 pandemic. Specific to transportation, the CARES Act also includes assistance for public transit to support operations during the COVID-19 pandemic, and that's important because right now in Kansas, almost half of our transit agencies have been affected by the pandemic, and they've been forced to reduce or suspend their services. So to help deal with these challenges, $25 billion was allocated to public transportation nationwide, again, through the CARES Act. The funding is intended to cover 100% of operating and capital assistance for public transportation operators that have been impacted by COVID-19. So yeah, in addition to their standard operating expenses, the agencies can seek federal reimbursement for things like the purchase of PPE, cleaning supplies, maintenance costs, and even some of the salaries for personnel on administrative leave due to the service reductions. So under the CARES Act, let's talk about Kansas for a second. Kansas is scheduled to receive $92 million in transit funding. Funding for the non-urban providers will be apportioned to KDOT for us to disperse. That's about $39 million. And the remaining $53 million will be provided directly to the urban and tribal transit agencies. CARES Act is actually the third federal stimulus response to COVID-19. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are already talking about a fourth major COVID-19 stimulus package. And there's even been some conversation about infrastructure being part of this next stimulus thrust. The president has called for $2 trillion in infrastructure spending, and members of Congress have advocated similarly. You know, at this time, nothing has been decided. These conversations are still quite fluid, and we are monitoring the situation. And one last thing I wanted to mention, the KDOT cost share program, the deadline for applications has been extended to May 18th to give our partners more time to develop and submit their applications. And that concludes my report, sir.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. Rick, are you here? Okay. Is there any other business, Chad, that you have?
No, Chairman, just to echo Mike's comments that we had a meeting at the Chamber of Commerce, Wichita Chamber of Commerce, and Lindsay Douglas, the Deputy Secretary of KDOT, commended the Wichita leadership. That includes you all, board members, plus the Chamber of Commerce and REAP as well. So there is this support at the state legislation level is very much appreciated, the Wichita's leadership as well. That's all. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you. With that, we stand adjourned. Thank you all for being here.